Hey everyone, welcome to our episode today of Awkward Conversations. I have some wonderful guests today. I am joined by Amy McCarthy, who is our fabulous LCSW. She works at Boston's Children's Hospital and is an amazing source of information and has joined us for each episode. And we have a very special guest joining us today. We have Special Agent Bill Bodner, who is in charge of the DEA's LA Field Division. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, great to be here.
Absolutely. Now, the thing that we're talking about today is something that has become so pervasive in all of our lives, for better or for worse, which is social media. And, social media is a place to connect. It's a place to find friends. It's a place to make ridiculous TikToks, all that kind of stuff. But there are a lot of opportunities and dangers for kids to find substances online in many different ways than there used to be. This isn't on just the dark web anymore. This is, right out in the open on Instagram, using emojis, using code words, things like that. I would love to hear a little bit more about that from you, Bill.
Yeah, it's such a great topic, and it's interesting that you mentioned the dark web. And I think the first thing that parents need to do is kind of throw their reference point out the window. If you were thinking that today is the same as it was 3 years ago, as far as drug availability, drug potency, the dangers of drugs, it's completely changed now. I've been doing this a long time, and there's probably been more change in the past 3 to 5 years than the previous 20 years. So, I think it's important to set the stage with that. So, how did this happen? Where are we at and how did we get here? I think a big part of it was during COVID. A lot of the places people would generally go to get drugs, like brick and mortar places, I call them. And hey, they're the same places people would socialize at. When those places closed down, when that kind of ability to connect with drug dealers in brick and mortar places stopped, they migrated online. And that's really the same thing that happened to all of us in our work life. We started working online. And then as the restrictions were lifted, hey, at least in my business, we kept working online a little bit. We realized that it worked and we could still do it, and we're still doing some telework. It's the same with drug trafficking now. They've set up this model of selling drugs online with social media, with online marketplace to do their advertising. They're getting paid through these payment apps, and they've realized it works and it can be done somewhat anonymously. So they're really capitalizing on it. So the major change today is drugs are so much more available. The thing I like to tell parents is no matter, I know I can already hear people say, no, not in my neighborhood. Not in my neighborhood, we don't have a drug problem. Here's the reality. If you have a smartphone, you live in an open air drug market. You can order any type of recreational illicit drug and have it delivered right to your house and pay with a payment app. That's the danger of today that wasn't here 3 to 5 years ago. And when you kind of compound that with the type of drugs that we're talking about today, synthetic drugs, fentanyl, the opiate that
Mm-hmm.
everyone's talking about, that's really devastating us, especially our young people, and methamphetamine, the stimulant, that's really, in actuality, almost replaced cocaine now, at least in the California area and a lot of parts of the United States. So the drugs are more dangerous and they're more accessible. And I think that's the thing that parents need to be made aware of, that a smartphone has made that connection. And like you said, there's a lot of good that comes from social media with connection and everything, but there's also just risks out there. And we just want people to be aware of the risks so they can make better decisions.
Absolutely. And even, online, I know that recently there was a story that I had read about, sites that are legal that you get prescriptions through, but they were, young people were getting prescriptions for Adderall, for opiate, for prescription painkillers. I think we also have to remember that the landscape of drug use is no longer illegal drugs all the time. A lot of it is prescription medication. It's things that you already have in your medicine cabinet. It's things your kids' friends, parents may have in their medicine cabinet. And those things can be just as addictive and just as dangerous as, what I think many people consider the hardcore street drugs that are out there.
Man, here, and this goes to exactly what you're talking about, Jody, is if you look back, like 2012 was the height of what I would call the prescription opiate epidemic in this country. There were, I think, 255 million opiate prescriptions written that year. That's a tremendous amount when you look at the population of the United States, somewhere, I don't know, 300, 350 million. I don't know exactly what it was back then. Yeah. So that's a lot of opiate prescriptions written by doctors, filled by pharmacies, not the illicit drug markets. So what had to happen, and what we were a part of, and actually what like you were all a part of, is uh, educating people on this. Educating doctors about addiction, having them be aware of the dangers of these prescription drugs. The prescriptions dialed back to the tune of about 100 million, to where today we're maybe at 140 million opiate prescriptions. But guess what happened? That demand for the drug was there, and unfortunately, where it turned was the black market, and that's why we see now such kind of a willingness, or I don't know what the. Maybe you guys can help me with a comfort. Maybe that's why there's such a comfort now with seeking out these pills, because young people think, oh no, these are legitimate prescription drugs. And the reality is, the pills you get on the street are now, and hey, I'm in the pill business, right? I've seen more pills than millions, and we test them. They're 100% counterfeit now when you're buying them on the street. We buy them on the street every day. They're 100% counterfeit, and they all contain fentanyl. And that's kind of that piece that you're talking about, where addiction started with legitimate pharmaceutical drugs, and then as we restricted that, it popped up in the illicit market. And that's a danger. That was with opioids, but we're facing that today, in my opinion, with stimulants. When you look at prescriptions of Adderall over the past couple of years, and stimulant drugs, increasing drastically. And I've already seen black market counterfeit Adderall pills on the streets in Los Angeles that are made with Mexican methamphetamine and caffeine, and they look identical to the real pills. So that's the next danger we're going to face.
I remember back in the days of being young and stupid and, you experimented, you try things. That terrifies me now, because I know that so many people, you try one pill, you do one, experiment of something, and it kills you. And that's absolutely terrifying, I think, for parents now. It's just such a different environment than it was.
And it's real. It's real. The thing is, we have this awareness campaign called One Pill Can Kill. We're not saying that to create it's not a scare tactic. It's the reality of what's happening on the street. Like, we've investigated hundreds of cases where it was one pill that killed. And it's the danger is really. So I guess this goes to what you were speaking of. Experimental drug use, recreational drug use, and let's say substance use disorder. Generally, and hey, there's no absolutes, right? I'm generalizing a little bit. The person suffering from substance use disorder, unfortunately, they generally have more experience taking drugs. They're a more savvy drug user and drug purchaser. Hey, I see cases where they are deceived and they don't know they're getting fentanyl, and they get it, and unfortunately, it has the same effect on them that it has on everybody. But more often, we're seeing it happen with people experimenting with drugs and people using drugs recreationally. With the experimenters, it's mostly in the form of counterfeit pills. They think it's a Xanax. They think it's an oxycodone pill. Those are the two where we're seeing the most deception and the most harm to the community. And then with the powdered fentanyl, we're seeing it increasingly mixed with cocaine or mistaken for cocaine. And people, recreational drug users, who think they're using cocaine, using fentanyl, and dying almost instantly. And when we see these overdose clusters, like 3 or 4 people, unfortunately, overdosing at the same time, that's usually what it is. It's usually fentanyl that was mistaken for cocaine.
I think that has definitely changed, since I was a young person. I'm still semi-young, but since my growing up, I mean, that's changed dramatically. And going back to sort of what we were talking about with social media, how old? I mean, and Amy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. How old is appropriate social media? I mean, we all know that that's kind of what kids are doing now. Everyone has a social media account. What's the best age to start introducing that? And what are some of the tools that we can use to help keep our kids safe as they're starting out, in their social media?
Yeah, I can try. And to be fair, I'm not a social media expert by any means, but what I would say to that is that I think with all things, you have to take into account your child's not only chronological age, but they're kind of developmental age. The tricky part about social media is that kids tend to be so much more savvy than their parents. And so really doing your research about these things.
I've found fake Insta accounts from my, I'm like, what, I go stalk them on some, social media thing that they don't think I know. And I'm like, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, they know all the tricks and the tools. So parents really have to stay kind of up to date on, the updates and the advancements.
And, speaking of kids being savvy on the internet and really knowing so much more, than their parents do. I know almost every day my kids make me feel like I know nothing in relation to a technological device. But with that advancement and with those sorts of ways that they're now sneaking around, that's flourished into its own sort of code online. I mean, there's emojis, there's code words, all that kind of stuff. Bill, I'm sure you see that in your line of work all the time. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we deal with it every day. And I mean, if I told you, hey, your child was looking at a pair of blue Roxy shorts that were size 30 medium online, and there was a picture of, let's say, denim shorts, what would you think? What would you think? Would you?
Depends on I would be like 30 milligram Oxycontin maybe or something.
There you go. So that's what it is. I mean, Roxy is the slang for roxycodone, which is the pill that's counterfeited the most. The blue pills that are stamped with M30 that I hope everyone knows by now are the most counterfeited pill out there. That's what the social media ads are sometimes. That's what the online marketplace ads are. They're real things, but they're drugs disguised as other real things. And parents and everyone just needs to read the ad. If someone's selling shorts, they're not going to have a bulk discount for 10 or more, probably, or $20, but $12 if you buy 100. So apply common sense and look at these things and see if the wording or if the item that's being searched for, see if that makes sense in your kid's life. Like roofing tar, no, that's probably not something your child is gonna be looking for. But those are the types of things we see. Then we see this whole emoji thing come to life the past couple of years, and kind of probably started as a little bit of a way to beat the algorithms at first. When we started alerting these social media companies, hey, here's what's going on your platform. Here are the common street terms for these drugs. Here's what you need to search for. Then the emojis appeared, and a school bus, a plug like a electrical plug. If you saw an electrical plug and a school bus, what would that mean to you? To me, that means someone is a source for Xanax, or they're looking for a source for Xanax. I mean, the plug is indicative of a plug-in, a source making something happen, and a Xanax pill, which is where we see a lot of the issues, especially with teenagers. A Xanax pill is a rectangular pill, and it has score marks in it in sections. And a school bus, kind of visually similar, a long rectangular thing, and the windows are score marks. So that's how these emojis kind of take shape. Hey, kids know this code. Don't think that your kids don't know this code. It's just it's in the schools, it's everywhere, and it's important that I think parents become aware of it. And DEA has actually put resources online in emoji decoder, which is not all encompassing because the emojis are changing. They're growing new ones every day, but at least it's a place to start for parents. So you can find that at dea.gov, or I think there'll be a link in the show notes. You can look at that and go directly to the site and get a copy of what we're seeing out there on social media, the things to beware of.
Great. Yeah. And that, stuff like that, the more information you have as a parent is so helpful.
You can just search online. You can just be a curious investigator, do your own investigation online and search for drug terms, search for drug emojis. I'm sure our information will come up, but then there'll be a bunch of other information that comes up too. So you do have to stay current because I think one of the dangers is if you don't understand the threat of social media or the dangers of social media, you may not take it seriously enough and do the boundaries, the limits, and the monitoring that you probably need to do as a parent.
Another great piece of information that you can find in our show notes if you're looking is how to stay current on kids' tech trends. I know I'm probably going to go checking that out because I am, like I said, constantly feeling behind in what my kids are involved with in social media. I'm like, what does this do? How do you make that happen? And I think as parents, monitoring our kids' social media and really being involved, and there's a lot of commercial tools out there and parent resources that you can use to help monitor your kids' social media, to have access codes. But one of the things I think is really important, and Amy, I'm sure this is something that you can speak about, is really establishing some non-negotiable ground rules for your kids on social media. And those things may change as they grow up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the things that I've seen or that I've talked with parents about are, again, setting the standard that you are going to be able to check your child's social media. And the caveat to that is that your child is probably potentially very savvy and they might know how to hide things that they don't want you to see. So, just being aware that like what you're going to be checking might not really tell the whole story. But I think at least, having them know that like part of a privilege of having, Instagram, a Snapchat, whatever, kind of a TikTok, whatever it may be, is that, it's like you being able to like look into their room. Like, it's an extension of kind of themselves. And so that might be kind of one piece. I also think limiting social media time can be a really important rule to set, because it can just take over, a young person's life. And so, and adults too, just scrolling, and then kind of like getting detached from other activities that are healthy outlets for them kind of in their lives. Another thing that might be a consideration is, being able to, be friends with them on some of these sites. And so you might, again, be able to see kind of what they're posting or who's commenting on kind of what they're talking about. So if there's all of a sudden like a person that you haven't heard of that's, commenting a lot, who is this person? Like, is this somebody that we've met online? Is this somebody that I just don't know about from school? So those would be some of the kind of the things that come most to my mind. And maybe last but not least is, setting the standard and educating your child about what's appropriate to post online and what's acceptable or unacceptable. So that, later on, and things will always surprise you. New kind of expectations might kind of blossom as, your child posts something that you didn't think to say, maybe this was kind of a little bit too risque, or this wasn't very, kind of a safe thing or a healthy thing to be posting about. But to try to get ahead of that and be able to say, these are the types of things that like we can post online, and these are some of the things that we can't post online. Overall. And another consideration might be also having a conversation with your child about what they feel comfortable about you posting about them kind of on social media.
I mean, I know definitely I have 14 and almost 12-year-old girls, so I have to give photo approval at this point, because I'll take a picture and they're like, oh my gosh, don't post that. I look terrible. And I try and respect that.
My mom means well, but she...
Yeah. Right. I'm like, I just want to have a family picture. And she's like, no, I don't. I'm like, okay, I will respect it.
Saving lives means staying informed. Knowing the dangers of using counterfeit prescription pills can help those you care about and keep our community safe. As a parent, educator, neighbor, or friend, we all play a role in building safe and healthy futures for ourselves and our loved ones. Do your part. Take the first step today. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com to access education, prevention, and treatment resources. Counterfeit prescription pills laced with fentanyl are deadly. Be their protector. Be informed. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com.
Now, I know one of the ways that a lot of parents have found to be more involved in their kids, online and social media presence is to not allow their kids to be on the computer or maybe on their phones in their rooms. They have to use the computer in an area where the parents are, or where there's, in the kitchen where there's more traffic. So they're less likely to be involved in something that they wouldn't want the rest of the family to see.
That's such a great point, because I think earlier we talked about, you said, hey, when I was young, this is what the threat was. And now when you take a drug that's 50 times more powerful than heroin, and I tell you that, hey, your child can now get this sitting on the couch. When you're upstairs doing some late night work on the computer, they can get it sitting on the couch and just run outside to the car and actually get a delivery and use a payment app, if they have a payment app, to pay for it. I mean, that's the difference in the threat from years ago to today. And that's why I ask parents to do a reboot. It's not how it used to be. It's different now.
So We've been talking about how to help our kids maybe prevent substance use online, how to prevent them from getting into dangerous situations online. If we have gone on our kids' social media, or if our kids have brought a concern to us, or we find out that they have been using or abusing substances, now what? What do we do? Amy, what are sort of next steps?
It can be really upsetting when you find out this information, especially if you didn't know or have any sense that your child was using substances before. And so being able to kind of take a step back and kind of, again, make a plan, regulate kind of your emotions. If you're parenting with someone else, looping them into the discussion. So that would be kind of maybe step one. I think step two would be to, then make that plan to kind of talk to them about this. I found this on your phone, or I found this on your social media. The school called me and there's rumors that this is happening, or even the school called me and I know this is happening. I'm concerned about what's kind of been going on, and we need to kind of talk a little bit more about that. And at that point too, you might loop in other kind of professionals like, therapists or school counselors, pediatricians, to also kind of help you kind of look at that. I think you also have to look at the bigger picture too on some of this. Like, I think you need to take this as a red flag, but then also look at, like, are there any other kind of like signs that like your child might be using substances as well? Something that people might consider is beginning kind of some routine like drug testing of their child, even if it's for a temporary kind of period of time, just to be able to get a sense of, this happened, this was on your phone, or again, I heard about this from the school. And, like kind of similar, like we've talked about in some other episodes, I need to set some boundaries here, and I need to set some limits that don't feel really comfortable probably for either of us. But in order to protect you, I need to kind of know some evidence of like, more hard evidence of like what's going on here. And so you might consider doing some testing to look at, are there any substances in your child's system, whether again through your child's pediatrician, which is probably going to be the most accurate type of test that you can do. Or of course they do sell at home kits that families can easily kind of access at their local pharmacy.
One of the other places that's a really great resource that you can go to that will be in our show notes for parents who are looking, it's the SAMHSA locator, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And they have a lot of information on there about dealing with mental health issues, depression, anxiety, all of that kind of stuff, which really leads into substance abuse issues. The two are so interconnected that you really have to be able to look at both. And so that's a great resource if parents are looking. It's the SAMHSA locator, and you can find that in our show notes as a link. Bill, Amy, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. This is a really important conversation. I think parents need to remember that the internet and social media is the biggest open doorway into our homes and into our child's lives. I'd love to hear any final thoughts from Bill and Amy. Bill, why don't we start with you? Any final things that we should let parents know?
Sure. I'll just say to parents, know the landscape now. The landscape has changed. Learn the risks and be involved. Don't be afraid to get involved.
Yeah, and I would add too that social media, again, is such an extension of our real lives and our kind of everyday life. And so as a parent, have kind of permission to treat it as such. And that may mean that, if you're finding things that you're concerned about on your child's social media, you may kind of limit their social media use. You may kind of also limit some of their other social interactions until you can kind of get a read on kind of what's going on. And just, again, feel free to set those limits going into the experience of signing up for these things in the first place. And good luck. It's a tough thing out there.
It absolutely is. Like I said, with two teenage girls right now, social media is a big, big issue in our house, and often a source of contention, but it's because I know, as their mom, I just want to keep them safe. And I know that's what all of the parents out there want to do. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. It was a wonderful conversation. And, I always like to remind parents and everyone, caretakers out there watching, there's no perfect way to do this. Just be present and listen and be involved. Like Bill said, just being involved and being present is really sometimes the best that we can do. So thank you guys so much for such an important conversation. And thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jodie.
Coming up on the next episode of Awkward Conversations.
The real goal here is to have lots of small conversations, as you had said earlier. So we often will refer to it as 61-minute conversations, but it's really a lot more than 60.
Particularly when kids are in that preteen, teenage era, the last thing they want is the parental caretaker, like, we're going to sit down and have a serious conversation.
One thing that we can do as parents and as adults is to take a second or two to reflect on why we get anxious.
Building their self-worth, building their self-esteem, helping kind of connect and ground them to the people in their lives and the communities that surround them, and of course their family of origin.
Make sure to check out getsmartaboutdrugs.com. Parents, caregivers, you can find so many resources of great information there about how to talk to your kids and make these conversations a little less awkward. A huge thank you to the Elks DAP, which is the largest all-volunteer nationwide drug awareness program, and also a huge thanks to the DEA for their outreach program and for making this possible.
The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Awkward Conversation series are solely those of the individuals, speakers, commentators, experts, and/or hosts involved, and do not necessarily reflect nor represent those of the production, associates, or broadcaster, or any of its employees. Production is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the series available for viewing. The primary purpose of this series is to educate and inform. This series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This series is available for private, non-commercial use only. The production, broadcaster, or its channel cannot be held accountable for all or any views expressed during this program.